Welcome back to Faith Unraveled. This is our second episode in our series of religious deconstruction. This is my partner, Jamie. We deconstructed our Mormon faith 4 years ago. And one of our favorite topics is discussing the deconstruction. It's been such a gift of our lives. And today we're going to be discussing the unraveling process. Now, the reason that this is so important to me is because I realize now, after 4 years of deconstruction, that unraveling allows you to see the impacts of your indoctrination on your life. It helps you to pinpoint areas of your life that were imposed on you. And now you have this beautiful opportunity to write your future. And in order to do that, it is helpful to gain a perspective about the way that your life has been crafted and the people and the experiences that have contributed to that. And in many cases for people, as they deconstruct their faith, they see that there are beautiful aspects of self that came as a result of their religious experience. And they also see that there are harmful aspects. And to deconstruct those is to unravel that or untangle it. And so the first year of deconstruction for us was kind of like you awakened, realized you were in a box, then stood outside the box, looked at the box and said, that's the box I was just in. Now looking at the world around you and making sense of the world around you. That was the first year of the unraveling for us. Just standing outside of the box, making sense of friendships, making sense of belief systems, just really existing in the world today at ground zero. But then if you could imagine with this analogy of the box floating up above the earth 20 feet, 40 feet, gaining a perspective of it then at that point. And what you'll see at that point are dynamics that you didn't see the first year. The more you unravel the events of your life, you'll see how they not only impacted you, but impacted people that had different kinds of experiences. So for instance, in our religion, people of color, people who are not cisgender straight, they had impacts of the indoctrination that we as cisgender white people did not experience. This unraveling process can be painful, and it can also be beautiful because it can open our minds and open our perspectives and allow more room for self-love and empathy.
Yeah, I have to take what unraveling is from an onion, right? As you start peeling the onion, right, you peel a piece and then you realize, oh, I'm not into the center. I need to peel another piece. And you keep on peeling pieces until you eventually get to that core of yourself. And I felt like during my unraveling, I had to continue to peel pieces. And every time I peeled a piece and I thought, oh, I'm done here. Oh, no, there's another piece to peel. And I think this process for me went on for about a 2-year period of time as I tried to unravel the indoctrination that was inside me or the Mormonism that was inside me to better understand, is that what I really want? Anthony Miller talked about it as a puzzle, right? The church, your view, your perspective, as you were talking about, is one big puzzle. The puzzle falls on the ground and breaks into many different pieces. And then you have to pick up each one of those pieces and determine whether or not you want to keep that. Do you really want to keep it or do you want to throw it away? As you get down to your core essence of who you are through that unraveling, you then determine whether or not, what do you want to rebuild? And so that was a big step for me, and that took me in many different areas, and it took a long time to get through that.
I love that analogy from Anthony Miller. His bishop had been working with him, sitting down with him through his faith deconstruction process, much like our bishop was with you. I think it was his bishop that had that realization that his faith crisis was like this puzzle crashing onto the floor into a million pieces. And now he says, you're going to have to bend down and pick each one up and evaluate each piece and decide which is going to go into your new life. So what I would love to invite everyone to do is enter this phase of your deconstruction and the unraveling as an opportunity to rewrite your life story. For us, it took a whole year just to unravel stepping outside of the box. Friendships, immediate impacts. Are we going to keep going to church? sometimes you tell people that you don't believe anymore, and it's like, okay, we'll just move on. But even the decision to stop going to church and stop participating is a huge decision when you've been so in. And so that's what this episode's going to be. It's going to be unraveling the first year after stepping outside of that box. And I think it's good to do it on a timeline like you suggested. So where in the timeline do you think we should start?
So we ended off with the awakening, right? And where you had gone through, you read the CS letter, I came home, you told me about it, and you had awakened, and you had flipped from being like a 10 to a 0. But after that awakening that you had, and as you began to unravel, I saw a lot of pain and grief during at least the first 3 to 6 months of that process, where I saw you on the floor crying. And I saw a lot of pain and despair during that period of time. I didn't feel like I could even understand what you were going through and how to help you during that period of time. Do you want to share?
Right after my deconstruction, I was basically debilitated. And I know that probably sounds extreme to some people, but some of you will resonate with that. For some people after a faith crisis, you don't know how to exist in work. You don't know how to exist with parenting. You don't, in some cases, know how to exist within yourself. And in the first year of deconstruction, I felt a degree of grief, but more of the reason that I was debilitated, and I could not see this in the moment, but the reason that I can see now is that the modalities of my day-to-day life, waking up, reading my scriptures, saying my prayers, listening to conference talks, those were my mechanisms for productivity. And I don't just mean productivity as in like building a website. I mean productivity as in getting up, taking a shower, like just doing day-to-day life. And so as a result of this, I slipped into a definite depression. Was grief an aspect of that? Absolutely. I was absolutely devastated, feeling like this church, which was essentially a primary attachment figure for me. And there's a therapist that talks about this on TikTok. And I did not realize this, that the church is like a primary attachment figure for you if you were raised in the church. And so it's almost like losing a relationship. And if you're someone like me, who is a golden child of Mormonism, you are devastated when you come to these realizations that the narratives that you were taught in primary as a child were largely fabrications. They were largely rewritten by the church. Many of them weren't true. And so there's so many aspects of grief, but the reason that I wasn't able to function was more because I lost my modalities for productivity. I lost my blueprint for having a day, not even like a super productive day, just a regular day. And so I didn't know what to do. Like, I can't keep reading my scriptures when I've just unearthed the realities of the Book of Mormon history and the claims that weren't true and the realities of Joseph Smith. And who am I praying to? I just deconstructed the Mormon God. Like, I didn't know how to put one foot in front of the other. And so what I wish someone had told me at that time is, you're going to have to rebuild those. You're going to have to explore, be curious, try new things. There's so many books and authors. Guess what my podcast time was? Like, you know how I listen to a lot of books and podcasts now? You know what I used to listen to? Conference talks and the All In podcast. And it had to be faith promoting for me to spend time on it. Conference talks, Sherry Do interviews, the All In podcast. No shade to the All In podcast. It was honestly my favorite podcast. And that was just one other thing that I was like grieving. And so what I wish someone had told me is, there's all these other tools and resources out there. You're going to learn to be more productive than ever. You're going to learn how to sit in not being productive and be totally fine with that and have self-love, unpacking the reality that even on the most unproductive day, you're still worthy. You're still loved. Like, there's so much beauty that can come of unraveling this stuff. But in the beginning, you're just stunned and you don't know what to do and you don't know how to function in the world.
Do you think that's because of the high demand portion of the religion and how it encompasses everything around you?
Number one, it's the high demand religion. And number two, it was my personal application of that. So I had religious scrupulosity. We could have many episodes on whether or not religious scrupulosity is only something that people with a clinical OCD diagnosis will have. But my argument would be that the religion teaches you that you will only be blessed to the degree that you have understood that principle, right? That every blessing is predicated
upon obedience.
Yeah, right. And
principle.
so you've got to be obedient. And so if you want to have a really blessed life, you better be really obedient. That's part of our doctrine.
Yeah.
So you could call it religious scrupulosity and try to lump it in with a mental health disorder. But what I would say is that I was very faithful.
Yeah.
So I really made every day an attempt to do things perfectly. And so for me, part of the reason that I was so disabled leaving the church and stepping away from the church is just because I lost the framework that was my day-to-day life. And I didn't know how to live without those things. And so I had to learn how to do that. It would have been helpful if I had known that in the beginning. I think it wouldn't have taken 4 years if I could have just known, okay, that was one way to do things. There's lots of successful people in the church, and there are also successful people outside of the church. And also, your life value isn't dependent on how successful you are, how many things you do. I mean, I had my whole value tied into productivity and how much I could do and how perfect I could keep my house and how perfect I could keep myself and how perfect I could teach my children. And you just realize after unraveling this that a lot of that was part of the indoctrination too.
So you talked about at the very beginning that one day you went from believing to not believing anymore. You went into this framework being unraveled. Was there also a view of nihilism that came in to where you lost this internal perspective and the unknown became a bit scary?
Yes. The single most paradoxical moment of my life that I can see is the moment that I realized that the church wasn't true. Because I had prayed for a resolution on a spiritual topic that I had been struggling with. And a few days later, I found the CES letter. So in the same moment that I felt my prayer had been answered, I deconstructed Mormon God. And that was a really destabilizing experience because it was like in the same moment that I received truth, I also felt God leave the room. And I would vacillate between the possibility that we return to dust and this is all just a physical experience, and this idea of mysticism, that there is something loving and abundant out there. And I hate that we have to boil everything down to labels, but I know it is really helpful to convey an idea quickly. I do identify as agnostic because I don't know, but I'm also warm to the idea that I have had human experiences that have transcended the laws of the physical world. And I'm not sure what that is. So I feel like I kind of, as an agnostic person, vacillate between being spiritually agnostic and the possibility that it's just a physical experience and there's no meaning other than that we live, we love. And I know nihilists that have a beautiful life perspective because they view life as very much in the now. For some people, nihilism is a breakthrough and they're like, I'm going to make the most of my relationships. I'm going to get everything out of this life as I can. I'm going to make my footprint in this world. And I know that thousands of years from now, nobody will know who I was. That kind of like instills this sense of like bravery because if nothing matters, then what does it matter? And so that can be beautiful too. I don't mean to say that there isn't beauty in nihilism, but for me personally, I tend to feel more comfortable with mysticism. Mm-hmm. I like the ideas of manifestation. I like the ideas of my the sacred language of light. I think it's talk about a paradox too. I think it's also really funny that I love stones now. And here I am deconstructing Mormonism, and like, this is what Joseph Smith was all about, magic stones, right? So it's just funny how you kind of land in these different places. But again, unraveling it allows you to see things in a new way and say like, oh, maybe I'm going to circle back to abstaining from alcohol, but I'm not doing it because of the word of wisdom. Now I'm doing it just because my gut microbiome doesn't love alcohol, and alcohol doesn't I love alcohol. Alcohol doesn't love me. So anyway, that's a long way to answer that question.
Yeah. And what was interesting is yours went pretty quick going through Mormon God, right? You unraveled
in a moment,
where for me, it took about a year to get to that point. Matter of fact, during the time that you were on the floor crying, I was still a believer at that time. So we had flip-flopped. I went from being like halfway believing to where you no longer believed. I'm still halfway in. I still believed in Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon at that point in time. And it took another 3 months before I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I need to start unraveling all these, or I need to jump down the rabbit hole and truly understand. And so that for me was my step into like unraveling everything around me. But I first had to unravel whether or not the Mormon God was still true or not.
Now, let me ask you this question. So you had about halfway deconstructed when I had my faith crisis.
Yeah.
You were keeping it to yourself because you felt that our marriage would not thrive if you presented that you were having these struggles with your faith. So as a result, I assume there was a lot that you were keeping to yourself. Was my faith crisis an invitation to you to start digging into some of those questions that you had?
Not right away. That's what was very interesting about that, because I had gone to a certain point and I was okay to like, when you went through your faith crisis when we went to Palm Springs, we started breaking the word of wisdom, but I didn't feel like I wanted to step away from the church. I still believed Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, and I still believed in the Book of Mormon, but I could almost get into a nuanced space and say, hey, I still believe in these two things, but a lot of this other stuff I didn't believe around it. And so I'm like, okay, the Book of Mormon there, I'll start following the way I think and believe Mormonism should be at that point in time. So I was still attached, those anchors that the church had protected itself from members leaving, those anchors inside me. I'm like, that's a natural man. I need to hold to the rod. I'll hold to the rod the way I want to hold to the rod, right? And so over those 3 months period of time, when you started deconstructing or unraveling your belief, I was like still believing at that point.
A lot of people have this experience of they can deconstruct everything, but they've got it programmed in their mind that Mormonism is just better. It teaches you how to be a productive person. And there's this level of protection that you have in the church that a lot of people will stay even after they've deconstructed because they feel safety there. Yeah. And you have a very compelling story about this because you have family members that were the original anti-Mormons in Nauvoo. And you were taught a very specific narrative about that curse that was given to your family, right? Yeah. Joseph Smith cursed the people that were persecuting them.
Yes.
And those were your family members. In fact, the one who was involved with the Carthage Greys is actually an ancestor that you're named after. Isn't that right?
And I was named after the same ancestor that was part of the Carthage Greys and was a driver with the Carthage Greys. And there was a secret that my family have about my grandfather, and we assume that he might have been part of the martyrdom of Joseph Smith. And so my dad has always talked about our family being cursed. And part of that is because we were anti-Mormon and against the church. And then my family down from there, he sees a lot of mental health issues that come along with our family. And so he relates that curse with that mental health. And so going into the unknown, jumping down the rabbit hole, there's a lot of scarcity, I guess I had around leaving the church and stepping into that unknown and being okay with that unknown because of the discussion of the curse when I was a kid or until I was an adult. So it was a significant barrier to me letting go of everything.
You had to unravel the logic of this.
Yeah.
Like you deconstruct all the church, but think of the emotional components to being taught your family was cursed and you would be cursed also, except that you joined the church and that broke the curse.
My parents joined the church and that, well, and you talk about it, and you have to go back into church history here, but they say the curse lasts for 3 to 4 generations. And I would be the 4th generation that it's at. So there is a lot of pressure around that as I was beginning to deconstruct and jump down the rabbit hole.
We talked about the mechanisms that the church uses to keep us faithful, and they're primarily fear, guilt, and shame.
Yeah.
And this would be a primary usage of fear because you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to my kids if I step away from the church? Are they going to become addicts? Are they going to become lazy? Are they going to become, all these negative connotations that we have for apostate kind of people?
Yeah.
And so this is really scary. So even when your logic is telling you, I've deconstructed all these things, I know that this was a lie. But when you've got your brain indoctrinated with all these emotionally charged issues, like the prosperity of your children, your progenitors, like that's a scary thing to try to sacrifice.
Yeah. We got to the point where I did jump down the rabbit hole, but I still wanted to continue going to the church. I still wanted to find a way that we could continue going to church without being a believer anymore. And that was very difficult to unwind and unravel because of the brainwashing I had of a curse.
Yes.
And so I really fought to keep into the church because of what I would have been taught in the past. And also because I felt the church overall was a net positive for myself and my family. I know it's not a net positive for everybody else, but I thought ultimately it was a net positive for my family. My kids had a community. They had a bunch of really good friends that were in that community. They were being taught values that I was taught growing up. And I felt like I was a good person because of those values I was raised with. And so I was worried about, as I stepped away from the church and no longer believed, and if I decided not to go anymore, how would my kids develop that structure anymore? What are those new values? And we were never taught how to gain those outside of a structured religion. And so the unknown became very scary for me. And that's the reason why at that point in time, I wanted to continue going to church, even though I wasn't a believer, so that I could provide that structure for the family, so I could provide that structure for us. I didn't realize how much that structure was also impacting us, but I was willing to continue going to church during this period of time just so that I could get stability and that structure for my own family. And that lasted for, COVID hit in March for us. So I jumped down the rabbit hole in January of 2020.
So if I could just interject here, I wanted to say that as you're describing this, it makes me realize that we didn't know we were in a high demand religion.
No.
And so it's kind of like stepping outside of the box and looking at the box and going, I was just in that box. This is part of realizing like what kind of box that was. A high demand religion does not allow you to exist on your terms.
Yes.
The reason for this is because the church is always pushing its members to get where? The temple. You can't go to the temple unless you're paying 10% of your income.
Yeah.
That's a huge sacrifice. 10% of your income, no coffee, no tea, no rated R movies. To be an active member of the church, that's participating in the church the way that it is prescribed to you, your life is like a 9-year-old child.
Well,
you don't cuss, you don't criticize, you don't gossip, you don't dress immodestly, you don't go to clubs, you don't have the appearance of evil, you don't do any adult things. And so that is a huge sacrifice. And if you're not doing it that way, there's this constant state of at least low-grade shame, because all of the lessons in church are geared toward getting members to conform to this prescribed archetype. And so you don't realize that until you step outside and you're going through this experience where you're like, okay, I'm going to develop my own kind of iron rod.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Supporting gay people, for one thing, allowing people, teaching your kids consent. Okay, well, the more you start to develop your own value system that is your iron rod, you realize this looks nothing like the church's iron rod.
And that's where it went. Like, I started to meet with the bishop because I felt like I wanted to still continue to go. And so from probably February to June period of time, I was meeting with bishop like either monthly or weekly, depending upon what was going on. And we were friends, and we had we used to golf on Saturdays, and so he would spend those times to talk to me about like where I'm at. He wouldn't dictate anything. He just wanted to listen to where I was at. And I think he realized at some point in time that because of that puzzle, like broke into so many pieces, he didn't even know how to handle all those different pieces. As I was bringing up like church history stuff, he himself was very new to that and needed to do some research and understand it more. And that's how we got into Bridges, because he was trying to figure out a book to be able to help me and minister to me during that period. And we read that. But ultimately, I looked at those temple questions, because the temple is where, you know, a worthy family couple
and if you're never wanting to do the temple, there's really no point in Mormonism.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, to some certain extent. I think there's some people that still go to church without going to the temple and get things out of it because of the value system. They like the value system. But ultimately, all your saving ordinances to where you get to highest degree of heaven is what they call the celestial kingdom. You can't get to the celestial kingdom without those temple ordinances. And
to get those temple ordinances, no coffee, no tea, that you're living the life of a 9-year-old child.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have these questions you have to answer, which asks you to verify that you're living like a 9-year-old child, to make sure you're worthy enough to get to the temple. And I found out I couldn't answer like a number of those questions anymore.
I would like to say that if I were an active member of the church, I would feel very offended by someone insinuating that I had to live like a 9-year-old child. I realize that is an offensive sentiment, but it is my sentiment standing outside of the box. Yeah. I remember as a little kid thinking, I grew up in a very relaxed, I haven't told my story yet, but part of my experience growing up is that my parents were very cool. They were not super orthodox. They were not super scrupulous like I became. And I remember thinking, oh man, when you're an adult, there's so many cool things you can do. Like you can do anything. Like the world is your catalog. You can do so many, like as long as it's legal, like, yeah, you can experience all kinds of things. And as I became more devout as a result of going to EFY and to doing all these things that were indoctrinating me into believing that this way that I was raised was not the ideal, you want to live this way. I eventually become an adult, super scrupulous, doing all the things, living my life like a 9-year-old child. And one day I just realized it. I was an active member at the time, but I realized my life is exactly like it was when I was 11. Like my clothes are dictated by someone. It's almost like the church is almost like a parent figure. Mm-hmm. What I put into my mouth, am I allowed to do this? Am I not allowed to do this? Even the experience that I had of posting on Facebook and then someone from my stake reporting me to my church leaders and then having them contact me, it's like you have parents over you. When you're in that, you don't realize it. But when you get out, you're like, oh my gosh. I mean, I'm an adult that had no agency in a church that claims to be all about agency.
Well, and the church doesn't allow any negative discussion around that, no criticism whatsoever. And that's exactly what you did during that period of time. And that was at the first year of our unraveling, right? So we talked about, I went through Unraveling for a full year, but that May period of time, right after we jumped down the rabbit hole, you had a comment on Facebook, which someone reported to our stake president, which then had our bishop come to our home to talk to us.
And I just want to say, because I know you and I had talked about this before, that we really wanted to drive this home, that the bishop that we had at the time of our deconstruction had the most Christ-like perspective that I can think of.
Yeah.
Like, when I have since deconstructed the notion of Christ as the Messiah, but I still value a Christ-centered life in the sense of being empathetic, being loving, leaving the 90 and 9 to go tend to the one lost sheep. And the bishop that we had at the time exemplified that. He epitomized it. Yep. And we've been very lucky to have had multiple bishops that are this way, just incredibly Christ-like people. A lot of people have not been that fortunate. So I feel really lucky to have had a bishop that was willing to take that time with you. He went way above the call of duty, way above, and to be a true friend to you and to always validate you. And he never gaslighted you
not
on
once.
Anything.
I do want to bring up, like, when we had our sessions together, I kept on asking whether or not he was acting as a bishop or was he acting as my friend. And that was very important to me, because as I looked at like Leah and Cody Young and what they went through in Ohio and how they were threatened to be excommunicated, they might have been excommunicated. It's been a while since I've listened to their Mormon stories. Bill Reel's situation, to where all he was doing is sharing about the church history and being critical about the way they did not bring that forward, and he got excommunicated for that. I was scared. I was scared that if I brought any of this forward, that I could have been excommunicated for it. And at that point in time, I did not want to be excommunicated. I did not want to lose those salvation ordinances that got me to that celestial kingdom. And so I needed bishop to tell me at the time, are you acting as a bishop or are you acting as a friend? Because if you're acting as a bishop, I don't know if I can trust you. Like, if you're acting as that person, then, and I'm sharing this stuff, it's going to affect the way you look at me. It's going to affect, like, whether or not I could be excommunicated too for that. And so what was very nice for him is he's like, I'm your friend. I'm your friend. He did end up saying, I have to act as both here. And I appreciated that. But the reason why I separated that, because I didn't want the bishop talking to me. I needed a friend. I needed someone that was in the church to kind of talk me through this.
And just to explain, a bishop or anyone in church leadership has basically two roles. You have a ministry role, which would be more of what you think of with a friend. Yeah. And then you have an administrative role. And the administrative role is dictated by a book of policies. Yeah. So a bishop who is trying to minister to his ward may have to sacrifice some of his own discretion in order to follow those policies. For example, in 2015, if a child in the ward wanted to serve a mission, but one of their parents was gay, they would not be allowed to. Yeah. Now, this is where you have bishops who feel an intense breach to their integrity.
And they will still allow them to go on missions.
And they don't know, don't know what to do. So we just heard about a woman who's a trans woman who was baptized into the church. And we're going, is this the church that's allowing it? Or is this kind of a rogue bishop who values the ministry over the administrative aspects? So when you say, were you being a friend or were you being a bishop? What you are saying is, what are you valuing in this moment? Your ministry to me or the administrative aspects of an elders quorum president coming to you saying, holy shit, I just found all this stuff. Yeah. You know, I think you were actually in Young Men's at the time.
Yeah, I was in Young Men's at the time. And that was even problematic for me because I think he was trying to help me out through that. And he asked me to bear my testimony at a time where I didn't have a testimony at all. And I just felt more and more as I was trying to hold on to the church or hold on to that rod, I just found out that there was no way to hold on to it anymore.
What a gift that he asked you to bear your testimony, because that was the moment that you realized that you couldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I at that point in time, I realized, and this is right before COVID hit. I think it was probably the week right before COVID hit. And I realized there's just, I will never be able to have a calling again, because I cannot stand up and talk about the church the way they want me to talk about the church because of the history I know. And so that, I think, and COVID hitting had an impact on me and on the family, where you had stopped going to church to a certain extent. You were only going because you wanted to be with the family. And it was me that was saying, I'm going to go no matter what. That allowed me to take a step back and say, hey, we don't need to go anymore.
Let's go to March of 2020. It was actually the end of February 2020, right before COVID hit. I deconstructed the fall prior to that. I was logically completely deconstructed, but my emotional brain was still in some ways. Yeah. I had a fear of my children not going on missions.
Yeah.
I had a fear of them not going to church anymore. I had a fear of them not being part of the community. I was afraid of not going to church. I actually was afraid of that. I was afraid of you not going to church, even though I didn't say it. And on this one particular day in February of 2020, a few months after my faith crisis, you had signed our family up to pass out waters at the Carlsbad Marathon.
I did.
And it was on Sunday. We had to get up and be there at 5 a.m. to set up our booths. And we did that. And I remember it being so painful. Like, if I think about from a somatic experience, the feeling that I had in my body, there was intense anxiety missing church that day. Even though I had just totally deconstructed, there was this intense anxiety in my body, like in my gut. Like, I can still feel it. Like, it feels like there's just like a knife wedged in there. But we went and did this thing. As the marathon starts and the runners are starting to come by, and we've got our boys there and you're there, and we're filling up waters and we're handing them to the runners. In the beginning part of the race, you've got like the people who are like professional athletes running through. And after a few hours, you get these people that are like, this moment of running this marathon is like
a huge achievement.
I mean, to me, running a marathon for anyone at any point in their life is a huge mark of achievement.
Yeah.
And for these people, some of them had like someone holding them, like kind of holding them up, and they were really struggling. You see strangers supporting each other. And I can't tell this story without getting emotional. We're handing waters to these people, and it was just this very simple exchange of humanity, just giving this person who is visibly suffering because they're at the end of a marathon, take the water. And I just wept under my glasses. I just had this profuse weeping. And I realized that what I was experiencing there was humanity. And humanity is the beauty that we find in the church, the connections that we have with people. That's where we feel the Spirit. That is the experience of the Spirit, is human connection. And I realized at that time that inside the box, there were beautiful opportunities for humanity and connection. And outside of the box, there are beautiful opportunities for humanity and connection. I would have to be more intentional about seeking out those experiences, because in the church, they're all there for you. Whether you're a young women leader and you're taking something to a girl that's struggling, or you're picking up food at the Bishop Storehouse, or you're taking a sister that you visit teach down to the Polinsky Center to visit her kids because they were removed from her home a few months ago. I mean, those are all experiences that I had in the church, that I had to let go of. And what this marathon taught me is that these kinds of human experiences exist everywhere. And we just have to be willing to seek them out. And that was the experience that taught me it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay to leave church.
So what's interesting about this is right after that marathon, we went into COVID. Like, I think the marathon happened, and then I had that 1 week, and then COVID happened right after that. And so we were able to then step away from church. Matter of fact, I think church for maybe a month or two wasn't going on because of COVID. And then they figured out ways to have church in your home and through like a Zoom meeting and stuff.
And you went to those faithfully for quite a while.
And I did.
I don't know about faithfully.
Yeah, because I was
dutifully.
I was really trying to see if there's a way I could be in the church as a non-believer, and so that I could give that structure to my family and that value system to my family.
Did you find that there wasn't much left?
That's what ended up happening is I found out like I couldn't bear my testimony. I couldn't make it to the temple. I struggled listening to people talk about Joseph Smith, and I see Joseph Smith as a predator. I see this guy as he coerced young women to have sex with him. I see him also as a con man and a liar, similar to what he was doing in the treasure digging prior to him finding the Book of Mormon or saying that he found the Book of Mormon. Like that pattern is the same throughout his entire life. And so I had to like walk through that pattern and realize that. And because of that, I'm like, I don't know if I can be in this place anymore and have that same belief system that I had. And so with that, as we started disconnecting, I had to share some of this stuff. Like I think we talked about, I was so angry. We did a lot of nature hikes during this period of time. And we hiked almost every day for a while, for like 2 or 3 months. When COVID hit and everything started shutting down, the one thing we could do was hike. And we would hike as a family going up the mountain. But for me, it was more for my mental health and my mental sanity, because I was like very angry at the church for being deceitful to me. I was starting to lose, I felt like, friendships, because I myself had to disconnect from that. My family relationships became tense. I don't know if tense is the right word, but they were strained for sure. I'm following my integrity. I'm sharing with you guys that I no longer believe, and to come back and say that you're disappointed, that I chose captivity and death, that response triggered me significantly to where I needed to take space. My mom wanted to come out during that period of time, and I told her, I can't have you coming out. And I know she was hurt by that significantly, but I needed to figure this out myself, and I didn't want any influence around this. I wanted to go back to facts. I wanted to read journals. I wanted to read true history, like forget the church history, because that's what I learned prior to my mission, and I found out it was a bullshit. I needed to go back to the core of where these conversations were happening and see it and read it myself just to verify it, because what I had been taught was so different than what I started learning from like those sources that I had. And so it was very painful for me to hear from other people like that, hey, you need to hold to the rod. You need to still continue to believe Joseph Smith. You need to still continue to believe the Book of Mormon. It wasn't there. Like everything that I had been reading was contradictory to what they were asking me to do. And so I needed my own space and time with myself to figure that out. That was some hikes by myself up the mountain, because I just needed like to get away, and I needed to think through that. And so I took space from friends and family during that period of time as I started working through whether or not Mormon God was real.
It's interesting as you talk about this. This episode is like ground zero of deconstructing. Mm-hmm. As I said before, it's like stepping outside of the box and then just making sense of the world around you. taking on messages from family members that are saying things like, I'm disappointed that you've chosen captivity and death, feel very hurtful. Now being 4 years out and being at like 100-foot elevation of this, I look at it as more of, I can now identify that person as someone who's just running in circles with their own programming.
Yeah.
They're just reiterating what they've been programmed to say. And that is not to belittle their experience. They believe that you have chosen captivity and death. What a disappointment would that be?
Yeah.
In really, truly, in reality. But when you're going through it at ground zero, you don't see it that way.
Well, it's hurtful. It
hurts so much.
Yeah, when you're at the very beginning of your unraveling and people are making comments because you're following your integrity, it becomes very hurtful and you become very defensive because of that. After 4 years of where I'm at today, I get it. I understand. I understand why some of the members took space from us as you started becoming more vocal, and I become vocal on Facebook. We lost friendships. We lost people because they felt like their integrity was being hit. And we've lived in both spaces. We were Mormon at one point in time. We saw when people left the church, and we said some very similar things, I think, when they left the church. As we look now, as we are outside of the church, we see it very differently.
In the same way that we teach our kids to stay away from needles and addictive substances that are going to take their life away, members of the church view us like that.
Yeah.
We're the needle. We're the heroin. We're the bad thing that's going to destroy your life. And I have to remind myself of this because there's people in the church that I still love so much. I still follow them on Instagram. They've unfollowed me. They will not respond to me. Their life stories are still a sacred place in my heart because I love them. I've been through a lot with them and I care about them. But to them, I am the wicked witch of the West. I'm worse than that. And that's such a hard thing to understand unless you really try to remember what that believing perspective was like. The anti-Mormon is the worst thing you can be.
Yeah. I believe at some point in time, and this is June of that same year when I was meeting with Bishop, that we came to an impasse that I think he saw that I wasn't going to change, but he was going to still love me for who I was. And I saw that these meetings are not going anywhere. And so we discontinued. We didn't formally say, hey, we're going to stop this. But those meetings stopped at that point in time because I don't think there was any like progress or moving forward. There was no path forward to staying in the church and keep my integrity. That's what I came to. And then I came to, like, if there is no path forward and me being able to stay in the church, I'm looking at Mormon God. I don't believe in the Book of Mormon. I don't believe Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. I don't believe that the church has a priesthood. So they always talk about you need to stay in the boat. You need to stay in the boat. This is something that the apostles say. That boat for me was an illusion. So as I was in that boat, Mormon God was real. As it became an illusion and that boat was no longer there anymore, I could not find any way to stay in that boat. So Mormon God went away from me during that period of time. So I would say by like August, September, I had come to the conclusion that what I had been taught when I was a young boy was not real. And at that point, it began another journey into that second year period of time, which was a lot more difficult because everything's wrapped into that boat. Like everything you've done in your whole entire life sits in that boat. When that boat goes and you're in the water, then you're treading water. That's when my identity crisis came a little bit later. I had to get to that point of not believing in Mormon God where you went through that like this. It took me 9 months to get to that point. When I lost everything, when Mormon God became no longer real and that boat became me treading water, I felt at that point in time I could come out publicly. So this happened like in October, November timeframe, where in Facebook, I remember thinking through all this, like all my Facebook friends are pretty much Mormon. I started going through it and I'm like, oh, these are some of my non-Mormon friends and some of my friends that left the church when they were young, but there were very few. A good portion of my friends were Mormon. And so I, at that point in time, made the decision, I'm going to come out publicly on Facebook and share where I am currently today and share why I am where I am today. And to me, that was the step, the final step that I made to say, I am no longer Mormon. And then I'm going to continue walking this path forward. And I got a lot of really good comments from people. Like there was people who pinged me on Messenger to see how I'm doing. But that then also started the loneliness journey, because once you make a statement like that on social media, on Facebook, a lot of people then started disconnecting from me. I felt like a lot, or I probably disconnected from them. That's probably the right term. I started disconnecting from them.
There was also something else that came as a result of you posting publicly on your Facebook. And that was people from our real life reaching out. And the reason I say real life is because you actually can make a lot of friendship connections in social media spaces. So the Faith Journey Meetups group, founded by Chelsea Homer. That's a great opportunity for women to connect. It's got people all over the journey. There's people who are just starting to wake up, and there's people who've been out for several years. So then you've also got the Mormon Stories podcast community, which has tens of thousands of people. I want to say they've got at least 20,000 in there. And these are spaces, private groups. Those two are private. Not all groups are private. It's good to know when you're posting in a group, if you are still private about your faith deconstruction, to find out quickly if the group that you're in is private. Because if it's not, then posting there can be seen visibly to other people that you're Facebook friends with. So make sure, if you want to keep it quiet, but you want to make connections, that you're in a private group. Don't post on a page.
There's Thrive groups out there too.
Thrive is a great place. Next step, if you want to meet people in person.
Yeah.
So Thrive Beyond Religion, it's an organization that actually a close friend of ours established. Two close friends of ours, husband and wife, they established. And it's a great opportunity to go in person and meet people. So that way, as the natural evolution of friends falling off will happen, you are creating closer relationships that are more connected, more authentic, more true than relationships that you've ever potentially had in your life.
The other thing I think was good about posting on Facebook or on social media, is kind of like what you did with TikTok, is it allows people to know that you're a safe place. Like as I was going through this, I didn't have a safe place. I didn't know who to talk to. The bishop, my friend, was the only person. Well, I shouldn't say. There was my prior bishop too, was another friend of mine, and I confided in both of them.
Another 10 out of 10 amazing human.
My business partner is another one that was very open and sat with me, and I talked to about that. And so I really appreciated those conversations, because they were able to sit in the space and me be derogatory toward the church and share the negatives of the church, and they still sat and listened. They didn't judge, and was able to like. I
have a few like this, and there's still people that I meet and go to lunch with, but I can count them on one hand.
Yeah, well, and we talked about this. And Elizabeth Gilbert said about this, and when she was first starting off as a book writer, and she was meeting with an artist, and the artist said, "Hey, you need to do certain things to become a book writer." And part of that was like, if she did these things, she'd lose the friendships that she currently had. And she said those friendships will meet you in both places. They'll meet you prior when you were
a nobody,
and then those that.
When you're Elizabeth Gilbert.
Yeah, when you're Elizabeth Gilbert.
And she said they meet me in exactly the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's who this one hand worth of friends are. They met us in the same place, and that's hard to do. And I will say, I don't think I could have done that, because when I think of people that have left the church,
You're really scrupulous.
I think that I've probably viewed them as a not safe person, even though I wanted to be loving to them, and I've since connected with them. But I would love to close off this episode of one of the most important realizations that I had, and it was the day that I woke up, is that I thought about the people who had left the church before me. And I realized that they had to leave in silence. People that I loved. And we're talking about some of the closest people in my life that did not tell me what they had found because they didn't want to hurt our family bond. And when I realized that, that was the first person that I called, because it's a parent. I'm trying not to throw her under the bus too much. She said I can mention it, but I don't want to be too exact. But this family member had deconstructed years before me, decades before me. And she had continued to go. She realized how she would be able to continue in the church, which was to not have a teaching calling, but to take music callings instead. She subsequently played the organ for like 20 years, and she kept this stuff to herself. And when I deconstructed and I found all of this, I called her, and our relationship is so close, closer than it's ever been. I can talk to her about anything. This is probably the biggest gift of deconstruction, is being able to see people as they are, without judgment, without expectation. The church skews our view of people. It tarnishes our view of people. People who are presenting themselves in the world in the best way they know how.
In the way that they want to present, right? Because the church wants you to present this way. If you don't present inside the box this way, then normally what happens is there's judgment that comes along when you're presenting a different way outside the box.
And I did that. Yeah. I remember my family member asking if she could order coffee at breakfast. And I said, I'd really rather you not, because my kids are here and they're looking at you as an example. It's a completely arbitrary rule. Yeah. Coffee does nothing to make someone a lesser person. It's their level of obedience to the system in the box. Yeah. And to think that I was viewing people through that lens, and deconstructing made me immediately realize the relationships that I had missed out on because of my indoctrination. And when you say it's one of the reasons that I talk on TikTok about my faith deconstruction, it is the one reason that I talk on TikTok. I want to contribute to the community that is the ex-Mormon community. I want to contribute to what John Dylan has built, and John Larson has built, and Chelsea Homer has built, and Lindsay Hansen Park has built, and Kara Burrell has built, and these people in the ex-Mormon spaces who are providing community. I want to contribute to that.
That's great.
In our next episode, we're going to start digging into the next level of unraveling, which is making sense of what your life looks like now, how it was impacted by doctrine, both negatively and positively. And so we hope you'll join us in our next episode of Unraveling. We'll see you.